You look around at the world today. Your kids at work. Your grandkids on their phones. Everybody talking about soft skills, emotional intelligence, reading the room. There are books, podcasts, online courses that promise to teach what a handshake used to say in 3 seconds. But by the time you were 18, nobody had ever handed you a workbook. And somehow, you still knew exactly how to act when it counted. Where did that come from? Your father grabbed your hand when you were about 13. Not to hold it. To fix it. He wrapped your fingers around his. Squeezed once, hard. Looked you in the eye, and said, "That's how you shake a man's hand." No book. No lesson plan. No explanation for why it mattered. But you never forgot. And if you're honest, you still shake hands exactly the way he showed you that afternoon. Here's the thing nobody talks about, though. Your father didn't invent that handshake. Someone taught him the same way. Probably his father. Probably without a word of explanation either. And if you think back far enough, you start to realize the man who straightened you out was once a boy who got straightened out by someone who never told him why. He just passed it forward because it was the only way he knew how to say, "I want you to be ready for what's out there." That handshake was just one line in a rulebook you memorized cover to cover. A rulebook nobody ever handed you. Most of us grew up inside a system we couldn't see. It started before you could spell your own name. The kitchen table was the first classroom. Your mother watched how you held your fork. And God help you if you reached across someone's plate. You said, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir," to every adult in your life. Not because someone gave a speech about respect, but because the first time you didn't. The silence in that room taught you everything you needed to know. If you grew up in a house like mine, there was a sentence that ended every argument before it started. "Don't you embarrass this family." 5 words. That was the entire curriculum. Your posture. Your handshake. Your eye contact. The way you spoke to your friends' parents when you walked through their front door. All of it flowed from those 5 words. You didn't study them. You breathed them in. Like secondhand smoke at a family gathering. Slow and steady. Until they were just part of your lungs. School was the second courthouse. And teachers were the judges. Mrs. Henderson, 4th period, could stop a boy mid-sentence. With nothing but her glasses sliding down her nose. And one raised eyebrow. You straightened up. Everybody did. Not because you were terrified. Because something in you understood. This woman is not asking. Nobody handed you a pamphlet that said, "Here is how young men and women are expected to behave." But by the end of your freshman year, you could have written one from memory. You knew you stood when an adult entered the room. You knew you said, "Thank you," when a meal was served. Even if you hated every bite. And the neighborhood enforced what the school and the kitchen started. Every adult was a volunteer deputy. In the same department. A neighbor, someone else's mother. Who grabbed your arm on the sidewalk and said, "Does your mother know you're talking like that?" And you knew, with absolute certainty, that by supper time, your mother would know. But here's where we have to be honest. Because the rulebook you followed wasn't the only edition in print. For a black teenager in 1962, the unwritten rules didn't start with manners. They started with survival. Don't look too long. Don't walk too slow. Don't be in the wrong part of town after the streetlights come on. And wrong had nothing to do with crime. A kid in the suburbs learned to say, yes, sir, to be polite. A kid on the other side of the tracks learned to say it to stay safe. Same words, different weight on every syllable. And for girls, the rulebook had a quieter chapter. Be pleasant. Be helpful. Don't be too loud, too smart, too much. Some of those rules were called ladylike. Some of them were just a way of keeping you small. So when we talk about that invisible rulebook, we have to ask, whose hand was writing it? And whose hand it held down? Some of those rules deserved to die. And they did. And we're better for it. But some of what that system built is not about the rules at all. It's about what the rules built underneath. You walked into a job interview at 17. You didn't have a resume. You barely had a sport coat that fit. But you looked the man behind the desk in the eye, shook his hand the way your father showed you, sat up straight, and said, sir, without thinking about it. And you got the job. Not because of what you knew, because of how you carried yourself into the room. A kind of quiet confidence that said, I know how to be here. I can handle this. You didn't learn it in a class. Somebody pushed you. The way a kid gets pushed into a lake. You figured out the strokes. And after a while, the water didn't scare you anymore. That's what the kitchen table was doing. That's what Mrs. Henderson's look was doing. That's what the neighbor on the sidewalk was doing. They weren't just teaching you manners. They were teaching you how to read a room, how to walk into any situation, and find your footing. Before anyone noticed, you were looking for it. And it went deeper than interviews. It shaped the way you treated people. You wrote thank you notes. By hand, on paper, with a stamp. Not because someone was watching. Because something in you said, that's what you do. When someone gives you their time. Or their kindness. You showed up on time. You kept your word. You showed up at the funeral of someone you barely knew. Because that's what people do. Small things. Ordinary things. But strung together across a lifetime. They became the way people knew who you were. Now here's the part that might be hard to hear. The people who built that system inside you. Your mother with her look across the room. Your father with his handshake. Mrs. Henderson with her eyebrow. They weren't perfect. And they knew it. Your father taught you to shake a man's hand. But there might have been nights he didn't know how to say what he actually felt. Because nobody ever taught him that part. Your mother could freeze your blood at 40 yards. But she was also carrying a rulebook of her own. One that told her to keep the house together. Hold everything in. And never let anyone see her fall apart. They gave you the best of what they had. And some of what they didn't give you. They didn't have it to give. That's not a criticism. That's the truth about every generation. Including yours. Including mine. We pass down what we can. And we hope the next ones figure out the parts we missed. These days, your grandkids might send a text instead of a note. They might work for a boss they only see on a screen. They might talk about feelings in ways that would have gotten you laughed out of the locker room in 1967. But maybe, just maybe, they're finishing a chapter that your father didn't know how to write. And the part of you that was trained at that kitchen table still beats underneath all of it. Because how you treat people is not a small thing. It's the whole thing. And they learn that from you. Even if you never said it out loud. Especially if you never said it out loud. There's a boy standing in a living room in 1965. He's 13. His father reaches over and straightens his collar before they walk out the front door. Doesn't say a word. Just one small tug on the fabric. 2 fingers. And a nod. That boy is 70 now. Every morning, before he leaves the house, his hand goes to his collar. He never thinks about why. But if you asked him who taught him, he'd know. And last week, his grandson came to visit. Suit too big. Tie crooked. First job interview. The old man didn't say a word. Just reached over. Straightened the boy's collar. 2 fingers. And a nod. The boy will be 70 one day. And he won't remember the interview. But he'll remember the hands.